the next largest P300, which you would assume to be the P300 elicited by the most potent irrelevant stimulus, you should be able to identify would-be terrorists before they do anything. This is what John Mexner and I called the blind IMAX test in the paper we did in 2010. Whoops, wrong way, sorry. And we got the following results. Each row is a subject, a participant, and what's the important column to look at are the guilty and innocent subjects in this last row, the blind IMAX test. These are the number of iterations out of 1,000 bootstraps where the probe comes out bigger than the irrelevant. And using that criterion, we catch 10 out of 12 terrorists, students in the lab, of course, pretending to be terrorists, without knowing what the probe item is, and we have perfect specificity. And, I'm sorry, good sensitivity and perfect specificity for an area under the rock curve that's pretty good. Now, Lucca came along and developed a new countermeasure, which I've schematized here. Supposing the information you want to find is the name of the would-be chief of the terrorists, and let's say it's me, Peter Rosenfeld. So Peter Rosenfeld becomes the probe item, and then there are several other names, and these are all irrelevant items. What you tell the participant, the terrorist to do who wants to beat the P300 test is you have the terrorist say mentally to himself the word cat whenever he sees the probe stimulus, as well as when he sees 4 of the irrelevant stimuli. And that way he's grouping, classifying, if you will, the probe with 4 irrelevants. It's one of the frequent stimuli. On the other hand, he's supposed to make the unique response of thinking dog to himself whenever he sees the first 2 irrelevants. And in that way, it was hoped by Lucca that these irrelevants would become most meaningful, and they're rare. And so now when you look for the maximum P300, you're going to find one of those top 2 irrelevants eliciting the P300 rather than the probe, and so the blind IMAX test will no longer work. And indeed, the countermeasure reduced this is Lucca now, the countermeasure reduced the area under the curve on the blind IMAX test to 0.78, although if you went ahead and did the analysis knowing what the true probe was, and tested against the average of all the irrelevants, you got an AUC of 0.91, which is good. So I wasn't happy that the proactive use of the complex trial protocol was impaired in this way, with this countermeasure. But I assumed, it was kind of my hope that this would be a very difficult countermeasure to learn, particularly on the spot, and that it would take a great deal of practice, which Lucca did use, to master the use of this countermeasure. So we did 2 experiments. In the first one, Joe Olson and I formed 2 groups, a practice group doing the same practice used by Lucca, and a no practice group who is instructed on the use of the countermeasure and then tested immediately after the instructions are over. And in this first experiment, all subjects are tested on semantic autobiographical information, birth dates. To my great surprise, I assumed that the no practice group would do much better than the practice group, but what better means is confusing. You can see a bigger CIT effect with practice than without practice. And that's not what I expected. I assumed that you needed a lot of practice in order to reduce the difference between the probe and the irrelevant, but in fact it seemed to come out in exactly the opposite way. If you look at the computed P300s here, oh, what did I do? Don't know what I did, but here I am. If you look at the computed P300s, you can see that the practice group, it looks like the probes are somewhat larger, although there's no main effective group, there's no interaction. There is the usual concealed information effect. The probe is bigger than the irrelevant. But this is comparing the probe with the average of all irrelevance. And that's not what you do in the proactive terror situation. However, pursuing this, we do indeed get a difference in mean numbers of iterations out of 1,000. And the practice group is better detected, if you will, than the non-practice. And this is, again, probe versus the average of all the irrelevance. And we do pretty respectably well. Indeed, with practice, we satisfy the 90% criterion. This is not a significant difference. The significant difference comes in the variability. If you square these standard deviations and divide the larger by the smaller, you get something that's distributed as F. So you can take it to the F table, and that is what you get. And what that means to me, I think, is that these people don't know what they're doing yet because they're practicing as they learn, and so they're all over the place. These people have practiced, and so their variability is lower. But all of that is, again, this is probe versus the average of all irrelevance. When you look at the probe versus the average versus the maximum irrelevant, which is related to our blind IMAX test, darn it, sorry about that, I don't know what I did. Here we go. We see the same tendency, that as you get more significant iterations with the practice group than the non-practice group, but that's not a significant difference. The variances are the same on the IMAX test. And these are kind of lousy numbers. This is like 56% to 64%. So Lucca, we replicate Lucca with this semantic information on birth dates. He used birth date, he used semantic information also. I think he used people's names as the probe stimuli. Those countermeasures do beat the proactive P300 complex trial protocol. And if you don't practice ahead of time, you do your countermeasures even better, and you can kill us. So that's experiment 1. In experiment 2, we assumed the same thing would happen using a mock crime. Evan, Sitar, and I made, again, practice and no practice groups, just as before. The participants steal either a watch or a bracelet for variety's sake to avoid bias, and there's no effect of which stimulus is used. All participants take the P300 complex trial protocol shortly after the mock crime. And here, this is probe versus, darn it, sorry about that. This is probe versus average of all irrelevance again. There is not a group effect. Here we do get the usual concealed information test effect. The marginal interaction prompted us to look at simple effects. There are none in the practice group. In the practice group, there's no difference between the probe and the irrelevant. And the Bayes factor favors the null substantially. On the other hand, in the no practice group, we get the usual CIT effect.